The Krenov station sat on the ice shelf like a fist. 7 modules connected by pressurized corridors, rated for winds up to 200 kilometers per hour, designed for crews of up to 12, currently housing 7. Commander Ellen Dray had been its senior officer for 4 months and had learned 2 things about the Arctic that no briefing document had prepared her for. The first was the quality of the silence between wind events, not peace, but pressure, the world holding its breath. The second was how quickly 7 people became their worst selves when the temperature outside made death a 10-minute proposition. They were a good crew. She reminded herself of this regularly. Pav Okafor ran the geological survey equipment with a patience that bordered on devotion. Siobhan Reyes was their medic and primary researcher, small and precise, the kind of person who alphabetized things without being asked. Kowalski kept the heating system running and treated it with the territorial affection of a man whose God lived in the boiler room. Bauer was their communications officer, quiet, competent, the one most likely to be found reading in a corner. Tess Aldrich handled atmospheric sampling and had a laugh that made the modules feel larger. Nils Faber was 26, their junior technician, still in the phase of wanting everyone to like him. Ellen commanded. She kept the schedule, settled the disputes, made sure they slept and ate and called home on Sundays. She had been doing this for 8 years across 3 rotations on 2 continents. She was good at it. On the 43rd day, Pav pulled a core sample that changed everything. He brought it in at 1,400 hours, still in the drill casing, and set it on the examination table in Module 4 without ceremony. Ellen was running inventory in Module 2 when Siobhan's voice came over the intercom, flat and careful, the voice of someone constructing their words with deliberate attention. "Commander, you should come see this." The core sample was standard width, standard length. The upper 2/3 were unremarkable, compressed ice, mineral deposits, sediment layers. The lower third was red. Not rust, not mineral staining, red in the way a vein is red, deep and even and suffused through the ice as if it had grown there, as if it belonged. Ellen stared at it. "Where did this come from?" 240 meters. Pav was at the table beside her, arms crossed, studying it with the focused expression he brought to anomalies. "The drill stuttered at 230, caught on something, then it went through." He paused. "Felt like wet cardboard." Ellen photographed the sample. She noted it in the log. She told them not to touch it until they understood what they were looking at. Pav said he'd already touched it. He said it the way you say a thing you know is going to matter. He had pulled the casing free with his bare hands before he'd seen the color. Brief contact. 10 seconds, maybe less. He showed her his right palm. Nothing visible. Nothing unusual. She told him to wash his hands thoroughly and come to Siobhan for baseline vitals. She told herself it was mineral contamination. She had been doing this long enough to know when she was lying to herself. They found the diary the following morning. It was Siobhan who found it. She had been cross-referencing geological anomalies in the region's historical database, a standard research task, and had pulled a digitized archive from a maritime museum in Anchorage. The archive contained, among other things, the scanned pages of a water-damaged log recovered from a vessel called the Resolute. Found drifting. No survivors. The log was dated 1896. The author was a ship's doctor named Abel Marsh. Siobhan read it in full before she said anything to anyone. Then she came to Ellen's module and sat down and put her tablet on the table between them and said, "Read this." Ellen read it. Then she read it again. Marsh's handwriting was careful and steady for the first 2/3 of the log. Then it changed. The entries described a red substance found in shore ice. Contact with the substance, the spread, the warmth. He described his own medical interventions with a precision that made Ellen's stomach turn. Every correct action had been wrong. Warm compresses, warm water, body heat, all of it feeding the thing rather than fighting it. The final entry was 3 lines. She set the tablet down. "Pav, she said. Yes. Siobhan's voice was very level. That's what I thought too. They went to find him. Pav was in Module 4, sitting at the examination table, looking at the core sample. He had not been scheduled to work. He had not told anyone he was going there. He was simply sitting in front of it with his hands flat on the table and his eyes fixed on the red ice with an expression Ellen had never seen on him before. She said his name. He looked up slowly. His eyes were right, focused, present, recognizably Pav. But there was something underneath the recognition, a quality she couldn't name immediately, and spent the rest of that day trying to. The closest she came was waiting. How are you feeling? Siobhan asked, clinical, calm. Cold, Pav said. Been cold since this morning. He looked back at the sample. Sitting near the heating vent helps. Ellen and Siobhan looked at each other. They isolated him in Module 4. They told him it was precautionary. He accepted this without argument, which was itself wrong. Pav argued with everything. It was one of the reliable pleasures of his company. He just nodded and sat back down near the vent and folded his hands in his lap. That night Ellen read Marsh's diary a third time. She paid particular attention to the passage about warmth, about how the substance moved toward heat. She thought about Pav sitting near the vent. She thought about the heating system, about the 7 of them breathing recycled air in insulated modules at -42 outside, about every comfort and safety measure this station provided. She thought about Marsh's last line. The cold outside had no heat in it anywhere. She didn't sleep. Pav broke out of Module 4 at 0340. The door wasn't locked. They hadn't thought to lock it, hadn't wanted to treat him like a prisoner when they weren't certain of anything yet. This was the mistake. Ellen understood it as a mistake the moment the alarm in Module 3 started screaming. She was in the corridor in 30 seconds. Kowalski was ahead of her, moving fast in thermal layers. They found Nils on the floor of Module 3. He was alive. He was pressed against the wall with his knees pulled up and his right arm held against his chest and his face the specific white of someone in deep shock. Pav was gone. The module hatch at the far end was swinging on its seal. He grabbed me, Nils said. His voice had a disconnected quality. Far away. He just grabbed my arm and held on. Wouldn't let go. I had to pull free. He looked at his arm. He looked at Ellen. He felt burning hot. Ellen looked at his arm. The skin at his wrist, where Pav had grabbed, was flushed. Deeply, redly flushed. Come with me, Siobhan said, quietly, firmly. She took Nils by his good arm and walked him toward the medical module and didn't look back at Ellen. Ellen looked at the swinging hatch. She sealed it from her side. She sealed every intermodule hatch she could reach. She found Bauer first and Tess 3 minutes later and told them both what was happening in the flat. Specific language of someone who has decided that the truth is the only remaining tool. Bauer's face went through several things quickly and settled on a stillness that concerned her. Tessa's eyes filled and she blinked it away and said, "Tell me what to do." They could not find Pav. Nils turned at 0800. Siobhan had been watching him through the night, monitoring his vitals, logging the progression with the same systematic attention she gave everything. She documented it in real time. Later, when Ellen read the notes, she found them both invaluable and unbearable. The redness spread from the wrist inward, slowly at first, tracking the veins, then faster. By 0600 it was at his elbow. By 0730 it had crossed his shoulder. At 0755 Nils said he was so cold he couldn't feel his feet and asked Siobhan to turn up the heat in the module. At 0758 he said he couldn't feel his hands either. At 0800 he stopped being Nils. The transition was not gradual. That was what Siobhan wrote in the notes. One moment he was frightened and cold and asking for more heat. The next he was on his feet. The next he was moving toward her with an expression that had no more Nils in it than a rock has warmth. His eyes were open and tracking. His mouth was open. His hands were reaching. Siobhan was fast. She got the hatch between them and sealed it from the corridor side and stood against the wall with her back to the metal, breathing in shallow bursts, while Nils hit the hatch repeatedly from the other side. Not frantically, methodically, the even, patient rhythm of something that understood it had time. She found Ellen in Module 2 and told her in full, every detail. She was shaking, but her voice was not. His skin, she said. His whole arm was the same color as the sample, not just the surface. Through it, like the tissue itself had changed. She stopped. And he was warm. When he came at me, I could feel the heat coming off him from a meter away. She sat down. The cold feeling, she said. I think it's the substance taking heat from the body as it moves through it, using the body's warmth to spread. The host feels cold because they're being consumed from the inside. The warmth is going into the substance, not the person. She looked at her hands. And then when it reaches the brain, it inverts. The body becomes a heat source, a delivery mechanism. It makes them seek contact because contact spreads it. Ellen thought about this. The heating system, she said. Yes, Siobhan said. The heating system. They lost Bauer at noon. He didn't turn. He didn't get grabbed. He was simply there at 11:40 when Ellen passed Module 5. And at 1200 when she came back, the module was empty, and the exterior emergency hatch was showing green. Open. Recently opened and resealed from outside. She stood looking at the indicator for a long time. She did not open the exterior hatch. She did not go out after him. The temperature outside was -44. A person in standard station gear had 12 minutes before critical hypothermia, possibly less. She marked Bauer as unaccounted for in the log and moved on because moving on was the only remaining option. Pav came through the ceiling of Module 6 at 14:30. There was a maintenance access panel above the water recycling unit, inset into the module roof, sealed with 4 clips. No one had thought about it because no one had thought about Pav having the patience and the knowledge to find it. He had worked in this station for 4 months. He knew where everything was. Tess was in Module 6 when the panel came down. Ellen heard it from 2 modules away. A crash. Then screaming. Then silence of a specific and terrible kind. She came through the hatch with the emergency kit and a fire extinguisher because it was the heaviest thing she'd grabbed, and she hit Pav with it twice across the shoulders before he turned from Tess and focused on her. He was hot to the touch even through her gloves. His skin had gone deeply, fully red, not flushed, not inflamed, but saturated, the color going all the way through, his face the same crimson dark as the core sample. His eyes were tracking but empty of anything she recognized as Pav. He moved fast. Faster than she expected from a man she'd worked beside for 4 months. She got the hatch between them and sealed it. She stood in the corridor and listened to him hit the door and looked down at her hands. Her left glove had torn when she'd swung the extinguisher. The back of her hand had brushed his forearm. Skin to skin, 2 seconds, maybe 3. She looked at the back of her hand for a long time. Nothing. No redness. No change. She didn't know if that meant anything. She went to find what was left of Tess. Tess was alive. Pav had grabbed her by both arms and held on, and she had fought free by dislocating her own shoulder, which she described in the flat voice of someone still inside the shock. Her forearms were red where his hands had been, both of them. The redness was already moving. Siobhan set the shoulder and wrapped the arms and said nothing about the redness, and Tess said nothing about it either. How long? Tess asked. Just that. Siobhan looked at Ellen. From contact to transition, Ellen said. Nils took 7 hours. Tess nodded. She looked at the ceiling. She looked at Ellen, and there was something in her face that Ellen understood without either of them naming it. An acknowledgement. A settling of accounts. Lock me in, Tess said. Seal the hatch. Whatever she did for Nils, do that. Tess. Do it now, before I feel cold. They did it. Ellen sealed the hatch herself. She stood on the corridor side and listened to Tess settle against the wall and begin to talk to someone at home on her phone. Someone who wasn't answering because there was no signal this far out, and there hadn't been for weeks. Tess talked to the voicemail like it was a person, like there was time. Ellen walked away. She found Kowalski in the boiler room, his natural habitat, his hands on the heating system's primary panel the way a man puts his hands on something he's already decided to protect. He looked at her when she came in, and she saw in his face that he'd already run the numbers. Marsh turned off the heat, she said. Marsh was on a wooden ship in 1896 with no other options. Kowalski's voice was steady. We have insulated modules, emergency thermal packs, survival suits rated to -60. He looked at the panel. If we drop the heat to 5 degrees inside, we slow the spread, maybe stop it. The ones who are already infected. He stopped. The cold slows them down, Ellen said. Maybe stops them. He turned to her. Marsh wrote that the cold was the only thing. Ellen stood in the boiler room of Krenov Station and thought about Tess and Module 3 talking to a voicemail. She thought about Bauer and the exterior hatch showing green. She thought about Pav, who had been patient and devoted and who was now somewhere in this station running hot as an engine, looking for contact, looking for warmth. She thought about the back of her hand. Do it, she said. Kowalski dropped the heat in stages, 5 degrees every 20 minutes. He said it was better that way, more humane, giving the uninfected time to layer up. Ellen put on every thermal layer she owned and still felt the cold arrive like a presence rather than an absence, pressing through the insulation and the walls and into the space between her thoughts. From Module 3, Tess went quiet at 2100. Tess began hitting the hatch at 2103. Pav stopped moving. She could track his position by sound, and he had been relentlessly circling Module 6. Around 2200. Not stopped entirely. Slowed. The interval between impacts on the walls went from seconds to minutes to something longer. Siobhan found her at 2230 in the corridor, sitting against the wall with her knees up and her thermal hood down because she wanted to feel the cold clearly, wanted to know exactly how much of it there was. Siobhan sat next to her. They sat together for a while without speaking. You should know, Siobhan said finally. I'm cold. I've been cold since about 1700. Ellen looked at her. I didn't touch anything, Siobhan said. I don't know how. The air, maybe. Prolonged exposure. She pulled up her sleeve. In the emergency lighting, her forearm had a quality that the light tried to explain away as shadow and couldn't. I've been feeling it for hours. I wanted to get the documentation finished first. She held out a sealed drive. Everything I recorded. Everything I understood. If you get out, she paused. Someone should know what this is, so the next people don't. She stopped. Ellen took the drive. Siobhan stood up. Seal the module, she said. Whatever room I end up in, don't wait to find out if it takes me the way it took the others. She looked at Ellen with the precise, unsentimental expression she brought to difficult truths. I'll try to find somewhere contained. Siobhan. Seal the module, she said. That's the last thing I need from you. She walked away down the corridor. Ellen heard a hatch seal, then another. Then nothing. At 0300 the station was almost entirely quiet. Ellen sat in the boiler room because it was still the warmest place, the heating system running at its minimum setting, keeping the modules at 4 degrees. Her breath fogged. Her fingers had passed through pain and arrived somewhere past it. She had her survival suit on over 4 layers, and she was still cold. She reviewed what she had left. Herself, the sealed drive, 3 modules containing things that had been her crew, Kowalski had gone at midnight, not infected, not taken, but his heart, which had a history she hadn't been briefed on, had simply decided it was done. He had been sitting in his chair when she found him. He looked peaceful in the way of people who have stopped fighting. She thought about the back of her hand. She looked at it under the emergency light. Nothing, still nothing. She didn't know what that meant. She had stopped trying to make it mean something comforting. She thought about Marsh, about a man who had known everything too late and had documented it anyway, had closed the log and put his hands flat on the table and waited with what he called something close to peace. She didn't feel close to peace. She felt cold and alone and very clear-headed, which was perhaps the same thing at the far end. She took the sealed drive. She took the emergency pack. She put on the rated to -60 survival suit over everything else, and she stood at the exterior hatch and looked at the indicator. The nearest research station was 41 kilometers northeast. She had a compass, a headlamp, emergency flares, 2 days of rations, and a suit that could theoretically keep her alive in the ambient temperature for up to 6 hours before the battery heating elements failed. 41 kilometers. She was not a slow person. She had run distance before. She had never run 41 kilometers at -44 in a survival suit across open ice shelf. She opened the hatch. The cold came in like a wall. Physical, immediate, the kind of cold that has intentions. The ice shelf stretched in every direction under a sky white with stars, and she could see for kilometers, and there was nothing. No light, no structure, no feature that suggested the world contained anything except ice and dark and the specific indifference of things that have been here longer than human meaning. She stepped outside. The hatch sealed behind her. She turned northeast and started walking. The cold pressed in from every side, probing the suit's seams, looking for entry with the patient thoroughness of something that had learned to wait. Her breath frosted instantly, the cloud of it whipping sideways in the wind. The ice under her feet was hard and unmarked, and went on until it went out of sight, and then kept going. 41 kilometers. She walked.
If you enjoyed this video, please do not forget to like, comment, or share this video with your friends. Subscribe to our channel to hear more stories like this one.